Oh, hello. Do I come in, Alan here?
You talk, do
All right.
things, say words.
All right. I'm talking, saying words as Alan figures out his mic situation. Well, welcome to the Defuse, everybody. It's gonna be an absolute blast to come through all the games here for ourselves. I'm hoping Alan comes back here
I'm
for us. It
good.
might be
We're
good.
good.
He's
We're
good
good.
now. We're good, Alan. We did it.
This is what happens, man. It's one of those things that the most unsung hero of any broadcast is who runs production. And when Mr. J Pistachio's not here, everything gets set on fire, and then it gets spit on by gasoline and fuel. Everything just goes wrong. It's just the way it is. But this is the fuse. We've got a lot to talk about over day number 2. So why don't we go ahead and get this fuse lit? Austin, I'm not gonna lie to you, man. This was probably one of the more stressful days, kind of like watching over games, like overall, like just period. Like it was such a stressful day.
Yeah, it was like it's obviously a weird start because we're in this like weird spot of like, trying to get things fixed and like we're seeing a lot of like super close games and there's a lot of emotion on the line, right? Like
Oh
there's a
yeah.
lot going into everything. Like it's COD champs and I mean, we usually wouldn't expect it to go like this, but at the end of the day it is what it is. We have what we have and yeah, it's a lot of emotion thrown into it, so it makes things very intense for sure.
Well, things got intense right off the rip as London would be going up against. Oh boy, why is this not playing? I'm telling you, everything just breaks, dude. You know why it didn't work? Because I didn't show the source. That's the reason why that doesn't work. So yeah, again, we're breaking things over here, but London would start things off, play it up against Toronto while I try to frantically fix things up. And I think the biggest question mark on our mind was what happens when this Toronto team maybe finds themselves down, right? Or really kind of for both teams because both squads have
Yeah.
had some trouble kind of closing out against top teams. So this was kind of a litmus test to see, the 6v7 essentially coming forward. Which team would have the more favorable setup, I guess, overall, when it came down to how do you get past this first hurdle in this big playoff run that's going to be coming forward for either of these two teams?
Yeah, and I mean, there was a lot of prep done like on each other as well, right? Like there's a whole month of it, and I feel like that was really relative to how we saw some of the opening maps play out for us. Like I think that London came out firing and almost to take these guys down. It feels like you have to do that, right? Because Toronto Ultra, is a roster that feel like they've proved themselves to be, extremely strong in a lot of clutch situations, and you can never count them out. It feels like in a lot of spots, and that's made them very effective, and it's made them very dangerous
Mm.
against a lot of the top teams that they have been able to beat for the most part. But I feel like there was some good adjustments, from the side of London as well. Like, I mean, they brought the search to them, right? Like, it felt like that
Yeah.
really caught them off guard. Toronto were unable to adjust really early on to some of those rounds, and it really impacted them pretty hard as we got later and later. And they're like, okay, wait, we have to stack more members by the A site because London has a really good hit, and they've read our setup on defense here on Ramazes. So that felt really good for them. But overall, it felt like Toronto were still a level ahead, and I think that comes back to the point we've made very, very many times about London being, I think, slightly too slow in some indications in a lot of spots. And I think you really felt that today in the series as it went on.
The thing that really kind of witnessed that was that first gun runner. I mean, how many of those gunfights were just completely
Oh yeah,
finessed by
it was
Toronto?
wild.
I mean, some of the slipperiest, is that the right adjective?
Sure.
It was a very slippery game, I think, for Toronto. A lot of sliding in, sliding
Yeah.
out, and taking challenges when London would least expect them, and just kind of existing for as long as humanly possible. But yeah, I mean, I think you're, as a Toronto fan, even though, yeah, you did get a little bit worked on the Ramaza, I think you feel good about what went right for you. I mean, Classic started off 7-0. That's always a
That's
good
right.
thing when you have an SMG player like that could really find a way to get themselves going quickly. But bro, I think the biggest overall story point was the simple fact that Toronto is looking like everything we wanted them to look like. After their
Yes.
own home series, they played so well. And that is super super important, I think, when it comes down to the ability for them to carry momentum from one weekend to the other. I mean, that was a while ago that we saw them, but they didn't look like
Yeah.
they slowed down whatsoever. And that has been the trend, I think, for a lot of teams that we kind of label as being in a honeymoon phase. We had that with New York, we had that with Optic, we had it kind of with LAG. We're not having it right now with Toronto.
No, we're not. And it feels like everyone like fits together extremely well. Like, I mean, like it comes back to, stacking this roster up with 10 players, before coming into, what was going to be the final form heading into the champs. So we had no idea what it was going to end with. And now I feel like everyone is just playing their role perfectly. This is also the first time I feel like we saw everybody else also step it up within like some of the slang, it felt like as well. Like there was a really big stat that came out at the end of champs where, two players had like 0.7s, 0.8s, and one player had like a 0.9 or something like that. And it was really the Kleenex and Cammy show that were kind of taking over completely. Where
Yeah.
I felt like everyone was contributing a lot more, and it was well rounded throughout this entire roster for themselves. Also, there's like a really deep understanding for this roster, like when it comes down to like certain game modes, like for domination, for example. Like there was a really interesting stat that I kind of like looked at after the games, and it's like there was a 45 to 20 cap difference, for as far as domination. And that just kind of shows you like when Ultra like are getting kills, like they're making sure that it's impactful and they're getting something off of it. Where I think it comes back to where you look at London and they play things, I think, a tad bit too slow, and they don't take as much map control in certain situations that they're given based off the kills that they get down. Like when they get 4 or 5 down, it doesn't feel like they're then in control of the map. They're still almost 50-50 in a lot of situations at a lot of power positions that really shouldn't be happening. So I feel like there's something really still not clicking for this London squad and as far as pacing. And I feel like it's the exact opposite for Toronto when they're just running over their opponents when they get any kind of momentum in these maps.
We saw it so often on that God Under Dom, like you mentioned, where it was
Yeah,
like,
we
here's
did.
3 kills in a row, like literally triple kill for somebody, no movement, no motion on the map whatsoever. And yeah, those are things that we've talked about that have plagued London all year long. That happened
Yeah.
when it was way back when we were having concern about their SMG line, and then there was concerns about the AR line, and now it's back kind of to the SMG line again. Something has to change, I think, for London if they want to try to extend this lower bracket run, which is, of course, what comes up next. And I don't think we could sit here and actually talk about this without bringing up the fact that disconnects are still playing in the CDL. Another
Yeah,
super unlucky
man.
situation, right? I mean, they're up 188, 170, something like that on Hackney Yard. 0 lags out after he had played an incredible series, by the way. That was one of the best series that I think we've ever
Yeah,
seen
it
from
was
Zero. And
100%.
for him to lag out at that point in time in a very pivotal game 4 in which they're looking to close things out, exiting, going from 2 to 3. I don't know, man. It's not just the fact that we've seen it for London, obviously. This is now, at this point in time, 3 of what had been 5 hard points had been plagued by a disconnect or a lag issue. I don't even know what we do at this point. I don't know.
Ah, man, it's really heartbreaking, right? Because obviously like we're prepping like information for the show and stuff like that, and we're looking at it, but like looking at it from just like a point of view from like just a COD fan, man, like it's really
It's
heartbreaking because
tough.
you're seeing like the competitive integrity, like kind of taken away in a sense. It's like, damn, like this is a match London could win here and take the game forward. And yeah, and this could very likely have been a series that went the distance and went to a game 5 where London looked good in the search and destroy. So
Yep.
there's a chance that maybe they do end up taking the series, right? There's a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas, but at the end of the day, it's unfortunate. I mean, at this point, like something, it's got to be kind of changed, right, for us, Alan? Like we
What do
need
you
like a
do?
pause feature. We need like, I mean, that's the question, right? What do you do? Like, what is the solution? What is the fix? Like, I don't know what it is. I'm glad I'm not in control of making those decisions, but I mean, whoever is, like, obviously, something has to be done here from this point.
I mean, we're going to get to a point where if this continues to happen over this last week, like we could be going into a championship weekend where millions of dollars are on the line for our final 4 matchups,
Mind
and
blowing.
players might not be able to fully play out 5v5. I mean, it's concerning. Like I'm super concerned because
Yeah.
not only does this have, I mean, it's, and again, at no point are we sitting here and saying that it is the fault at all of like CDL or anything of that nature. We're not trying to point fingers. We're just kind of labeling out the concern as a whole.
Of course.
What do you do? Like, if this continues to plague us through the rest of the week, do you have to put a pause on champs to see if there is a logistical way to get your final 4 teams to a local environment? Because you can't allow it to happen. I just don't think that, if no matter who you are, the CDL, IW, Activision Blizzard, I just don't think you can sit there and allow something with this much gravity to be played with so much question. It's something I feel like you might have to pause it.
I actually think that would be the right call. Like, there's also like a small part of me that almost doesn't feel like this is COD Champs too. I think due to the nature of it being, of course, online and not hearing the crowd, like everything is obviously more hype around this event, like throughout into Call of Duty history, since obviously we've had competitive. So like there's something like about it that says maybe you do just pause it and delay things like a month. Like we're gonna have a long off season, like we
Yeah.
always do every year, right? So like, is it that bad to delay a month and like actually look at doing some kind of a bubble with all the players and getting everyone on land? Like obviously other esports are looking at doing it. Sports are obviously doing it. So it's a question mark for sure. But I mean, I don't think it's gonna happen. But I honestly raise the question. Maybe this does raise the question this week of actually implementing that. Right?
I mean,
It's
it's
hard to
over
say.
50% of the hard points have seen disconnects now.
That's right. And I mean, it's unacceptable, right? Like, there's
It's
no other way
it's
to say
it's
it.
I mean, it's just it's one of those things like you have to, I feel like you have to do something. Like it's forcing your hand. I feel like something has to be done.
For
But
sure.
that'll be something that I'm sure we'll continue to talk about over the rest of the weekend if we see more of it. Bless that we don't. Let's hope and pray. But going on to our second series of the day, it was New York playing up against the Minnesota Rocker. And Exceed came out nicely. He looked good.
He
First hard
did. He
point,
did.
played well. Ramaza was going very well for Minnesota. But as Minnesota has kind of faced when it came down to Ramaza, they typically find a way to make things maybe too close for comfort. And New York is able to kind of get things going in the second rotation to win that 250-228. But then Arklov Pete came out, and oh my goodness, Exceed
Yeah. What
popped
happened?
off. He finds 6 kills with a sniper rifle through 7 total rounds and a 6-1 win. And that was, I think, reassuring, for Minnesota Rocker fans, saying that you're going to be in this series all the way through. Unfortunately, though, when it came to the Petro domination, they got kind of worked. I'm not going to lie. Out of the only triple cap, the one moment where they had a triple cap for about 10 seconds, that was the only moment where Minnesota felt like they were in control of the map. And it came on the back end of New York kind of flopping their setup for a triple cap. But then Hackney Yard, you're up 248 to what, around 218, 220, somewhere around there. You
Somewhere
can't
there.
close it out on P5. You lose the rotation to P1, New York hold, and essentially you get yourself what you saw, which was an incredible comeback for the side of the Minnesota, or pardon me, for the side of the New York subliners. So, an impressive showcase for Minnesota. Definitely being able to hold strong with the New York team, but this was kind of a info gathering match, I think, for both sides when we look at it.
I think that's a good way to put it, honestly. And I mean, we didn't really have a whole lot of info on this Minnesota roster other than we've been hearing, listen, they're a different team now. And I feel like that's what's been missing, right? Because Minnesota didn't make any roster changes for a very, very long time, except for when Alex got subbed out. So it
Yeah,
felt
last
really
second was that
refreshing
one
when you,
too.
that's right. Exactly. Exactly. So it felt really refreshing when, you had someone come in, but like of all people, like Goddard X is the one that's not playing and is sitting on the bench. And then that obviously draws a lot of questions. Like, okay, is Exceed going to be able to, kind of fill, a lot of those shoes? And well, the answer was yes in the search and destroy. He picked up the sniper. He did exactly what Cotter X would do on maps like St. Petro and Arklov
Yeah,
Peak. So that's all good and dandy. But I still feel like the same problems there for Minnesota, because it's not like Minnesota's been completely blown out in a lot of their matches over the last couple of months. It just seems like it's been the lack of being able to close the maps, right? Like
true.
that's been the big
Yes,
takeaway for
yes, yes,
me. Like,
yes, yes,
you know what I
yes.
mean? So like it's like if they're able to get themselves to a point where they can close out maps, like then they're gonna fix and they're gonna be able to add that missing piece to the puzzle here, which could be Exceed. But that same problem still showed here for us today, where they came back on, right, in the Hackney Yard, which was an absolute heartbreaker for them, because that could have been very likely a chance where they could send things the distance for us and get us to a map 5. So it's definitely tough scenes all around, but I still feel like that same issue still exists here despite subbing Goddard X out.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, you take a look at just the Ramaza last 3 times they've played it, which have been in the last 3 outings that they've had. You have the 228-250 loss today. To Florida at the Toronto home series, it was 226-250, and then versus Atlanta, 237-250. So I mean, like, all of these games, like you mentioned, are tremendously close. It just
For
comes
sure.
down to, again, like, I think you're absolutely right. Getting past that hurdle of how do you close out the game in the final stages, and we haven't truly seen a lot of that from the Minnesota team. But I want to talk a little bit more positively, because we do have this situation in front of us to where I feel like Exceed very well could be a possible solution for Minnesota. And I know if Caden's watching, he'll say the same thing that I'd said last year when he was on Sicario. I questioned, would he be able to hang at this level? And don't second guess the kid, because he will always put out a performance. And he did in the Ramaza. He did in the Search and Destroy. He didn't play poorly in the Petro and Hackney. He didn't shine by any means, but he definitely didn't play poorly. So when you looked at Minnesota going into this losers bracket run, do you think that this formation with Exceed entering into the starting lineup, that they could very well make an extended run more than what we thought at the beginning, which was if they go with the same 5 again, I think a lot of people had them getting DFR'd in their first 2 rounds.
It's tough, right? Because like New York's like a hard one to judge off of it. And I also think New York played pretty well. Um, I just don't think I can make an argument for it. Like you set up the the narrative of Exceed being able to do some things today, and it's all great. But like was there any moments besides the Arklov peak where he completely took over, or did something exceptional things to
I did.
me?
I mean, I don't think he
I
needs
don't
to.
know,
Like,
Alan.
I don't think they're looking at Exceed like, hey, we're putting you in the roster so you can take over. I think it's
Okay,
he's
sure,
filling a
fair,
role that
fair,
Goddard
but
X wasn't able to fill in, right? Like, I don't think they're looking for him to be the star potential of the team.
yeah, but who is? There's my answer,
Well,
or
okay,
there's my question after that.
that's fair. I mean, no, you're
You know what I
absolutely
mean?
right. You're right.
Like who is that X factor? I feel like if you look at every single CDL team, like you could pick one player at the very least that says, okay, like this player has the ability to take over, and that shouldn't necessarily be a win condition for you. Obviously, as it's a 5-man team, and everyone should be able to step up when needed. But that has absolutely played a factor here for us throughout this entire year. I mean, even you look at the bottom teams, like I feel like LAG still had a player that could step up at some point in time. Vivid was that player here and there.
Yeah.
It's a harder argument, but I feel like every team has that. I just still don't see that for for this squad. And Goddard Rex also was a player that did also do that at the beginning of the year, by the way. Like at LAN, like he was not benched for his performance. I feel like it was beyond that for as far as vibes and how things were going, and the change had to be made. So I think it's beyond as far as a player's performance and why they brought Exceed in. But I mean, again, it's not obviously the role he has to fit. He doesn't need to fit the superstar role, but it just doesn't. Nothing like is outstanding to me on this team that's going to be able to upset someone.
I don't know. I'm going to argue that with Exceeding the lineup, this collective 5, I think, will put up a really good fight versus Optic Gaming LA, which is going to be their next losers bracket run that they have to go through. I feel better about this Minnesota team than I did before. And I would say by a lot.
Fair.
By a lot.
I agree. I'd feel better, but I'm not convinced.
Fair enough.
I think that's my takeaway.
So going on talking about New York, the clutch moments, dude. I mean,
Absolutely.
We have to toot our own horn, though, right? I mean, we sat down during the playbook this morning and looked at how New York play Hackney Yard, and we talked about at the very end how they nearly make the mistake in that matchup that we watched. Where they were going for the long rotation from 5 over to 2 when the game was tight and nearly let London come back into the game. They don't necessarily take that same approach this time around. They full flood. Attach goes mammoth mode. He wins a huge break essentially single-handedly and then also holds single-handedly in that 220 to 248. After seeing a moment like that, do you put more stock into New York clutching up in this upper bracket round to potentially surprise more teams?
I think they can surprise more teams. Like, I think there's a factor that a lot of people are forgetting about, that like Zoom and Attach are actually really good, but somehow I feel like they're really kind of under the radar, it feels like in some cases, right? Where I think that they have the ability to be able to absolutely go nuts and clutch up. And you saw it here today. I mean, both of them were able to do it as well in the domination. Like they both played really well. Attach has a great understanding of when he needs to play the route man. He did that a lot on the very first map on Ramaza, despite him not having the greatest game. So I think that there is an argument to be made that New York can surprise people. Like they also surprised Chicago in the grand finals at their own home event, right?
Well,
like that was the big thing.
We'll
like,
talk about that.
I feel like that was still like something you can look back on and say, listen, this was a really good moment. They're going up against them. Like, I don't know. I feel like they can surprise people. Like you can't sleep on them. And if you do, I feel like they'll catch you by surprise and maybe take a series off you.
I am impressed, I think, with some of the subtle adjustments that we were kind of wondering if we did see that map, would they kind of correct how they kind of approach some things, and would they still find the same kind of successes? Again, remember that whole conversation going from P2 to P3. Can they continue to sneak people around the backside? The answer was yes. This is a sneaky team. This is one of the sneakier teams, I think, when it comes down to them specifically playing on a map like Hackney Yard, which is very difficult to be sneaking on because it's so small. But I mean, huge clutch moment from New York. I thought that was going to go game 5 for sure. But we would be left with just the insane clutch up for game 4, which I'm sure equally made people happy. So, instant segue. Now you do take a look at this New York team playing up against Chicago. And like you mentioned, last time they played, it was at New York's own home series where the meta was definitely AR favored with no 10mm ammo. But even in that 3-0 sweep, which was tragically close, you have to remember that the path for New York to get to that grand finals also led through Chicago in their own group, in which they lost in a game 5. And to be fair, Chicago during that home series didn't look nearly as convincing on modes like domination as they had previously. So, what are your biggest questions breaking down this matchup, I think, when you look at New York versus Chicago for either side?
Is Chicago going to be able to show up with the practice that they've gotten? Because I still think that the practice issue is actually a problem
I agree.
for this squad. I tend to watch like a lot of streams, here and there, especially when they're scrimming. Like I'm always intrigued to see like how things are going. And on more than one occasion now, I've heard RCDs like call out his squad for not trying, or it seems like every single day we get on, there's one person that's not putting in 100%. And I mean, to maybe the average person, that might seem like, well, it's fine. They're all talented players. They're going to show up when it matters. It's COD champs. It's the end of the year visions. Like they're going to do what they do. Well, on the other hand, it didn't look great when they didn't get good practice,
At
coming off their
Toronto.
previous event.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I feel like that could translate potentially, into grands. Like I think there's this problem right now that exists within a lot of the CDL players is like, this doesn't feel like the last event of the year. And I think there's a lot of problems with players being able to flick that switch saying this is champs mode, this is it, this is going to determine
Yep.
everything for the end of the year. And I think that doesn't exist for a lot of players right now, and they can't find a way to flip that switch at the moment.
For me on the other side, I think you hit all those points 100% correctly, but you take a look at New York, who are going to be in a tough position, I think, to win hard points versus what is currently the best hard point team in the game, and the Chicago Huntsmen statistically. But beyond that, New York has also shown a lot of holes on the search and destroy, and they
Yeah.
haven't necessarily looked as complete as you might want when it comes to the domination. Now, that said, we didn't talk about it, but New York, going into these playoffs, were one of the only squads out there that had hard vetoes for each of the individual modes, of which one of them is the St. Petro domination, which they smoked Minnesota on today. Now, that to be said, Minnesota's not the greatest domination team in the league by any stretch of the imagination, and Chicago's definitely a better one, but I'm kind of wondering if New York has a playbook ready to go for the Chicago Huntsman team as far as what are they likely going to pick? How are we going to counter them? And where can we put them to kind of exploit some of maybe their weaknesses? I think that's kind of the biggest thing for me is how good is the prep for New York going into Chicago? And I know a lot of people in their own brackets have Chicago losing this matchup. Like if there were to be an upset, a lot of people have New York beating Chicago. I still consider
Mhm.
Chicago to be the favorite. I pick them to win
I
this
do.
matchup. It just
Yeah.
comes down to what preparation I think does New York have specifically for Chicago going into that matchup, which is tomorrow, by the way.
That's right. And I think New York already did a pretty good showing of what they had in store and maybe just gave us a little peek and a little glimpse of what they
Right,
got in the
right,
bag.
right,
The
right, right.
goods are looking pretty good day one when they play St. Petrograd for the very first time and they come out absolutely swinging. And like, it's not like it was, a super close game in hand. Like it felt like, it was in control of New York, despite, a little maybe triple cap that came in at one point in time. So I think things look pretty good for New York. And yeah, I think you touched on it pretty beautifully where we might get to see some more of that finesse maybe come through in the map vetoes, and they might take Chicago by surprise, especially if it's like a map number one by surprise. I feel like
Yeah,
that's best case scenario for New York heading into the rest of the maps.
I agree. And then taking a look at the second matchup tomorrow, it is the Florida Mutineers going up against the Toronto Ultra. There is no bias on this broadcast as well, I will say Visions is definitely not living right in the heart of Toronto or anything like that. But for this one, again, the last time these two teams played was a long time ago. So long ago that doesn't
Yeah,
even make a difference because the rosters were different back then for, I
for
believe,
sure.
both teams, actually. So my biggest question mark for this one is have Florida found a way to get it better? Last time we saw them, it was at the Toronto home series. They don't make the playoffs. They lose 2 games to the Dallas Empire to essentially eliminate them from that home series. But that said, those 2 matches versus the Dallas Empire were very close. So, what are your biggest takeaways? As you see Toronto, they're still finding a lot of favor. They're still carrying the momentum. Do you think there's enough there to suggest that they could upset the Florida Mutineers tomorrow?
I think there's enough there to say they absolutely could. I mean, if there was a one upset that's going to happen in this particular round, I
I
think
agree.
it's
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 this one.
definitely going to be Ultra, over Florida. And I think that's because we've seen nothing but good things from them. I mean, like they're the previous champion coming off of their last event where all of these teams, like these top teams, were at this event competing, right? So that was the first real look to see all the top competition, and Ultra were able to take that. So they had a lot of great takeaways, a lot of good showings, and I mean, we saw a lot of that, on the same thing today, where yeah, map number one they slowed a little or start out a little bit slow, but they get everyone rolling, they get into a rhythm, they make adjustments and fix things up on future rotations, and things look a lot cleaner for them. I think that right now Toronto is one of the best teams at being able to make adjustments in
Mm,
respawn game modes,
that's fair.
which makes them really effective, right? Like that makes things obviously a little bit harder for teams to be able to read what they're doing or to be able to shut them down because they roll so well off momentum. So I think that's kind of some of my takeaways. The problem for Florida is they haven't been really scrimming or streaming their scrims rather. So I don't really know, how they look like because we're coming off of where we see them last, where things aren't looking too great. It seems like they're now starting to get themselves into a couple of problems. They're out of that honeymoon phase. Awakening is still great, but is it really the solution to fixing everything on the team? No, it isn't. So I'm a little bit lost for as far as, what we're going to see for Florida. I feel like it's one of two things. They come out absolutely swinging and they show everyone like, hey, this is us, and they're going to prove us wrong. Or, I think they're going to come out a little bit flat. They're not
Mm.
going to be able to adjust to maybe some of the tempo that Toronto's been putting on.
I think that's a fair point. Again, there were some slippery gunfights on that hard point gun runner that Toronto were just
Sure.
finessing angles. And
Yeah.
I'm going to be interested to see if Havoc, Frosty, those guys could keep up with that kind of potential. I mean, everything looked really solid from the SMG line of Toronto in that specifically. I think if Florida has the best chance, though, I think you have to take the Dom. I think you have to be able to take one, if not both, search and destroys because Toronto on the hard point is looking something different right now.
Yeah.
We are closing things out here in just a moment. We will be taking questions, though, from you guys in the chat. So all you have to do is just type your questions down in the chat room, and we'll try to answer them when we get to that portion. Feel free to be liberal with them. Ask whatever you want, and we'll do our best to answer them the best that we possibly can. But we need to talk losers round 2, just briefly, very briefly, while the questions start to come in. As we take a look at what's coming up, you've got a very interesting lower bracket. We talked about it, Minnesota Optic Gaming LA, London versus Paris. Quickly, though, who do you have exiting the tournament with top 8 next to their name?
Whew, this is going to be a really tough one, right? Like, it's almost going to be about who shows up. I really think that Optic is going to be able to advance here past their losers 2 match. I think that's simply because when you win a game like they did yesterday, man, like, dude, like you have no idea what that does. Like, I think to fuel some players.
Oh,
Like,
you win
there's
5-0?
obviously a
You feel
lot.
pretty good about that?
I mean, like there's a lot playing against Optic, right? There's a lot playing against Optic, and they're able to overcome and still win out in the fashion that they do, bringing in Dashy from the bench, who hasn't been playing the game at all, at the end of the season. So I think there's a lot flowing right now within the emotions here for these guys. There's a lot of young guns that are really hungry. I think Draws and Hollow, they're playing for a little bit extra. Not only are they trying to win, but they're also trying to prove themselves still here too. Even though they've had great showings, there's still a lot more that they have to get done. And I mean, I think that hunger is probably going to carry them through. So I see
Yeah.
Optic advancing. On the opposite end, I just don't know how Minnesota is.
Yeah, you mean Paris?
I'm
Paris and
sorry.
London?
Yeah.
Oh, you're
I
talking
think,
about
I
just for
think,
Minnesota in that matchup, you mean?
yeah, I just don't mean, I don't know how like Minnesota's going to be able to do anything. I don't know, man. I just
This
got
is
no
gonna,
confidence in them.
tomorrow is gonna be some of the more electric search and destroy I think that we've
Yeah.
seen. Like tomorrow's
I think
gonna be
you're right.
nuts, dude. Search tomorrow is gonna be
Yeah, it's going to
absolutely
be crazy.
insane.
It's going to be crazy.
For me, I think as far as like how does Minnesota take that series, you just have to be able to be a little bit more clutch, I think, when it comes to your hard points. I mean, you can't give away 240 to 220 leads when you could full stack Hill 5 and win the game. Or just commit to give up the 5th hard point and take that first. I mean, you
For
can't
sure.
get snapback like that. That just can't happen, I think, because it's like here's the thing, like what we saw today in both of our matchups, like the speed, the tempo, the critical decision making that was on display is at such a high level, and it's only gonna become more difficult as you go on. Like we're not
Yeah.
gonna see flops like we saw from Seattle and LAG anymore. Like every single matchup that we have coming forward is going to be insane, and I would not be surprised if the majority of them go map 4, map 5. Like I don't see a 3-0
Yeah, that's fair.
anywhere in the future of this bracket. Not a single spot. So I think if you're Minnesota, you need to be able to recognize, like, hey, when things get chaotic, we have to come back through with that same calm collectiveness that they had when they were playing on LAN. How many times did we see them clutch up Ramaz's and Hackney Yard hardpoints at the last second with some incredible breaks? We haven't seen that at all online, and that has to change, I think, if you're Minnesota. On the other side, though, I've got Paris in this one, man, against London. I think Paris is
I think
looking
so.
super, super tight. Their hard point was near perfect versus the Seattle Surge, which, again, was versus Seattle Surge. And maybe their domination had some question marks, but so does London. So I've got Paris in that one for sure.
I think you're right. I mean, I just, come back to my old points, not trying to beat like a dead horse or anything, but I just don't think this game fits some of the players of London. And I
I
mean,
agree.
maybe
I
it's just the
agree.
mesh, right? I think it's just maybe a bit of a mesh of how they set up their roster. And I just don't think that they can keep up with the pacing of some of these teams. Like maybe they can keep up with the pacing of Paris because it's not like it's anything significant. Like, I mean, Kismet is obviously a pretty cracked player and has been pretty insane for the most part. I think has looked pretty good, especially coming off that series, even though it is just Seattle still. I just don't see anyone on London matching that. And when
Yeah.
Paris almost kind of feels the same way as Toronto when they get themselves into a little bit of a momentum swing, you start rotating well, you're winning these gunfights, you're finding gunfights that maybe you shouldn't, but you are. I feel like that just carries so well, and London struggle too hard to stop that and shut that down.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to kind
Right
of
there
just
with you.
affect them again going into that matchup.
All right, so we're starting to get a couple of questions. If you guys have some as we're kind of trailing out, please feel free to ask them. We'll answer as many as we possibly can. Which winners round two matchup has the most upset potential? I think we both kind of answered this one. I think it's got to be the Toronto Florida game. I just
Yeah,
there's something
for sure.
about that Chicago team that even if they weren't having the best amount of practice, I still think that going into championships, even if it's just online, it's not the same kind of energy. I still don't see a world where Chicago looks as questionable as they had previously. I think they're going to be more prepared, and I think that even though New York looked better, I don't know if New York looks good enough to beat the highest potential that Chicago could bring tomorrow. That's kind of my take on it.
I think I agree. I mean, like, I just think that even though, like, yeah, like you said, like they're not getting good practice, there's just obviously like names on that roster that I
Oh yeah,
think maybe just carry them through. Like, you know what I mean? You got Scumpy, like top 10 player of all time for sure. Formal Insane AR, like the list just goes on. You know what I mean? You
yeah, it
can just
does.
absolutely pump those tires up for every player. So, yeah, I mean, I think Toronto, like, I think Toronto will upset tomorrow, and I think that they're definitely most favored to do so. Where New York, I think I don't know if they got that it factor, and if they do, and they beat Huntsman, then maybe we had this
Yeah,
conversation going forward is totally different.
yeah, totally, totally different. Who do you got getting MVP? Man, I don't know how the voting is going to work. Like, are they including this week of playoffs? Because I
That's a good
think
question.
I think this week of playoffs determines who the MVP of the league is.
I
There's
think so, right? Biggest tournament
there's
of the year.
it's biggest tournament of the year. I would have loved to have seen it be at the very end, but it is what it is. I mean, I don't know if it's just listed as a regular season MVP versus a playoffs
Mhm.
MVP. That could be a potential question. In my mind, it's it's too close to call. Like if I would take like the Doris Burke strategy of I'm not voting for my MVP until the final day possible,
Yeah.
which is what she does every single year at the NBA. In case you missed that
Sure.
reference, but that would be me. Like whatever the last day possible is to submit that
For
vote.
sure.
I think in my mind though, I'm looking at a player like Celium. I think is probably MVP in my mind, just for what he's been able to do to help clutch things up in key moments for the Atlanta FaZe. I think that there should be arguments made for Skies though, because he has been, I think, the most valuable player to bring the Florida Mutineers team to the level at which they've played at. I don't think there is an argument you could make like, oh, Celium is the reason why Atlanta FaZe is good. No, the whole team is
Yeah.
the reason why Atlanta FaZe is good.
Exactly.
It's the same
Exactly.
conversation for players like Shotzi. For me, I think Skies has done the most to a core group of players to make Florida as good as they've had been in surprise fashion this year. So I think there's an argument to be made for Skies as well.
I think Skies is a great one, and yeah, I mean, I think he's the best they are in the game. I think he is honestly.
Yeah.
I think that the argument can be made for that, and yeah, he brings so much. He's so impactful. Again, I always touch on it too, but like the fact that he finds some of the kills that he does up close with the assault rifle, like
Stupid. It's
is man,
stupid.
it's so disgusting. Like best at it for sure, and yeah, I think that there's one made for me personally. I'm still eyeing up Shotzi pretty hard. For potential MVP, and yeah, he's surrounded by a lot of greats for sure. But I think that Shotzi is just been incredible. He's got the best movement in the game, I think. So the argument's like, yeah, the
Yeah.
best AR currently in the game. You got the best player with the insane movement in the game. It's up in the air. Celium, I also think is absolutely up there with he's been able to do in some of these round 11s
It's
and game
insane,
fives
man.
in
So many
particular.
clutch
Like, yeah,
moments.
it's pretty filthy. So yeah, it's hard to say right now, right? But I think those are the top three that are absolutely in the conversation, and we will probably get it.
I think, kind of reflecting back, if it is regular season based MVP, I think based on the
It's
definition of
probably
who the
Celium,
most
right?
valuable player is, I think my vote would go to Skies, actually.
Oh,
I think
okay.
this because he brings the most value to the team as in a whole. Not to say that the rest of Florida's bad without him, but
I
I
don't
think
disagree.
that
Yeah.
because of his, like, his pop off from when he joined into the league last year. We played for what, UIU at the beginning of the year, and then gets picked up and plays on LG obviously, and brings them to a pretty high level. I think that what he was able to do for Florida and kind of becoming a mainstay, stapled AR player in a game that a solid AR player is needed, I think that has brought the most value to the team like Florida.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point.
It's a lot of things to consider. How bad do things need to get regarding DDoSing before they cancel, replay the entire tournament? I think you have to have more than 50% lag outs for them to consider something like that. If it happens at least once in almost every single match, and it costs a match, I think there has to be a consideration. I just don't think logistically it would ever happen, because it would be such a demerit on the entire league. It would sit there. It would be memed on by Dexerto, who's by far the most reliable publishing esports company out there, /S. But it would be picked up by everybody, and the backlash that would come out of it, I think, would overwhelm the current backlash of the league is still letting this go on.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it that way, actually. It's a really good way to think about it. I mean, yeah, like it's horrible because we all obviously want this, to be on land. We want it to be as fair as possible, but
Yeah.
the league's also doing what they can. How much has to happen? Yeah, like that 50% mark. Like if someone's lagging out of a game every single series, like
You can't let it go on,
because you can't go into grand, dude. Like you
it's
can't go
one
into
of
grand
those.
finals, right? Like
Yeah,
with that happening,
you
it's
cannot
just,
go
you
into
can't
grand
ever.
finals like it.
Hell no.
I'm kind of trying to put this in perspective. Like, the MLB right now is coming under fire because they're still trying to travel and play the 66 game season, and the COVID cases are going up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the bubble has worked. We all know it. Costs and that conversation aside, that's not where we're taking this convo. But I think if you are the CDL, you would have to handle it in a way like the MLB would, where if it's plaguing the playoffs this much, you would have to sit there and go, look, we tried it. It's not working. We value the competitive. Like, they would have to come out with a major statement saying, we have to reset this. And it can't look like we fucked up, we have to reset it. No, it's we want to make sure we're proactive and sit there and say that this is not the best thing for our league. We want the league to end on a positive note. We're going to reset this and do it in X way, whatever it is. And I just, the thing is, the logistics are still not good to bring all 12 teams to a LAN environment. And if you missed out on the Twitter conversation, check out on Mr. Adam Apicella, who put together a very good thread as far as why logistically and financially it's not necessarily as easy as just saying, well, the NHL and the NBA are doing it, so why can't the CDL do it? It's totally different markets, people. I mean, we're talking
100%.
literally a spit shine into the Pacific Ocean when it comes to comparing the CDL to your traditional sports franchises. But it has to cost, and I think it's going to happen sometime like in losers round 2 or 3, where someone goes home when they were up like 220 to 160, and the team bounces back because they finished the entire game 4v5, and that sends a team out of the tournament. Like, it would have to be something dramatic, I think.
Yeah, and everyone would lose it, right? Like, everyone would lose it. I mean, like, even like right now, people are losing it. So yeah, imagine something like that where a team is about to close things out, and it's a dire situation of it could actually send you home and knock you out. Then that might be the factor. It's a lot of speculation.
It's not good.
It's a lot of.
It's not good. It's not a conversation we like having.
No,
it makes us look like we're trying to attack people when that's not the case. It's a terrible situation to be at. But I think it would have to be something dramatic. Last question. Do you guys think that teams starting in the winners round 1 benefit from getting an extra rep in before taking in higher seeded teams? Absolutely.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And especially considering that they don't have a day off in between. It's you played today, you won, you play tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I think that's
really
big.
fitting. It carries well, right? Like, I mean, like you talk about that, going all the way back to, when we used to have like the old standard tournament layout, when we had like MLG events and things like that, where teams would start out, and you have that bad start, but you make that losers run and you start to build up momentum. Teams stop playing in the winners bracket because they're waiting between their matches and things like this. And you're playing against a team that's hot, and that obviously goes a lot better. You fix your mistakes, fix things up. So I think that it definitely is going to be effective, and for sure teams have a little bit of an upper hand right now.
Agreed. That's going to do it for the show. I hope that you guys weren't feeling crabby today with everything that's been going on. Love this shirt, dude. I will never get rid of this shirt. It's too good. Unless for some reason I outgrow it, which I will make sure I don't outgrow it in like width ways. That's the only way that I would ever get rid of this shirt. This shirt will keep me honest for my fitness, I promise.
All right, there we go. You heard it first.
Heard it here first. Hey, here's the last little bit of promo for you guys. Tomorrow before the games start, you're gonna want to come right back here. We'll be doing another playbook episode, and I'm not gonna lie, we gotta toot our own horns here. We have broken down 3 maps, 2 of which we have seen come through in the immediate day. We broke down New York and London on Hackney Yard. We got to see that Hackney Yard come through. We got a really good value out of it, and I think people that tuned in to watch could have definitely taken a couple of extra things away as far as things to look for. We're going to try to do that exact same thing tomorrow as we introduce Chicago and Florida back into the mix, so make sure you stop by to check out the playbook. That will be starting at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. But until then, we'll say farewell. Don't let that fuse fizzle out there, friends, and we'll catch you tomorrow afternoon. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.